Unscripted.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another podcast here. And if you're watching on video, you can see that P-Dubs isn't here, but I'm joined with Joe Latuszek, our praise team leader here. And Joe, great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be with you, Pastor. It's been a while since I've been on. This is fun to be back.
Right, because I think, you did the initial one when you kind of came on board last year? Or
Yeah. So I think it was probably a year and a half ago, yeah.
So it's great to have you back. And we have a special reason to have you on because next week, so this will be coming out on Wednesday, March 5th. But on Thursday, March 13th, we have a special night of worship coming up.
Woohoo! Yeah, we're so excited. It'll be our first night of worship as a church, at least as far as I understand in our history. I know we've done, music-related types of worship before, especially at events like BBBQ, but This is sort of unique. This is sort of fun.
Something new, and, it'll be a busy night. I'm just looking up because we have before the night of worship, we do want to invite everybody to the community meal that's coming on beforehand. So, what a great evening. You could be fed spiritually with the night of worship, but then also be fed with food.
Yeah, we love that as Lutherans. We love that food.
Right. I'm just looking up here what the menu's going to be. So the community meal will be in Fellowship Hall from 5 to 6:15, and it's turkey divine casserole, fruit, and dessert.
Oh.
So that's what will be on tap for dinner that evening. And so, you can come, have a great time with the fellowship there at the community meal, meet some different people, and then just migrate over to the sanctuary. We'll be having the night of worship.
Yeah, it's great, man. You can't beat a divine casserole,
No.
It's two great things right there. I, unfortunately, have never been able to make to a community meal because I'm usually teaching in the evening at our studio. But this night, I've taken off and stuff, so I should actually be able to join for the community meal. We'll have our sound check and stuff around that time, but I'm hoping to bug out of there quick enough that I can hang and have some fellowship before the
it's always a
service.
great night. I mean, usually over 100 people, it feels like coming in and out.
Oh, really? Oh.
So it's I think all together with takeout meals and stuff, we get over 200 and maybe even 300 meals that we serve that night.
That's awesome. I didn't know the turnout was so good.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's a packed house usually, so it's great. And, there's people from all around the community, people that don't go here, people that do, and they just sit at tables and talk.
It's hard to beat a good meal,
Right, and that's one of those, you really get to know somebody over a meal. I think, and I've shared this before at other places, but at my vicarage, my internship, one of our members there, he was an elder at the time, he started years before I came there what he called the dining club or something, I can't remember now the name, but once a month or once a quarter, they would say, hey, members of Redeemer Lutheran, we'll be at this restaurant for dinner this Friday night. Everybody can come and join us for dinner at whatever restaurant they had in mind.
Yeah.
And he was like, I started this so that way, you don't get to really know the person in the pew next to you. But when you sit down and share a meal with somebody, you get to know them and have a conversation. So, I think when it started, maybe 8 people, but by the time I was at my vicarage church, there was about 40 people from the congregation would show up at the restaurant and have dinner together. That's
really cool. Yeah, there's something that's really bonding about food and that time together. And I think that's probably why it's also important for that time in fellowship hall after service, even if it's just coffee, cake, and
coffee.
Coffee, cake, and coffee.
I mean, that's the main thing that Lutherans want is the coffee.
Yeah, that's what it still makes me laugh about both you and Pastor Warren is that neither of you are coffee drinkers,
No.
It's blasphemy.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I've really ever had a full cup of coffee. I've tasted some and it doesn't taste good. And
I just had a memory unlocked here as we're talking about this. The first time I had coffee was here at Immanuel, and it was during Tim Hetzner's Crossway Bible study class.
Okay.
My mom would take me and my brother all the time. And looking back on it, I think it was an adults Bible study class. And
probably.
But she was like, I'm bringing my boys. And so we were, I'm sure, very disruptive. But my brother figured out they would always have the coffee there, but he figured out if you put enough of that powdered creamer in there and 4 or 5 sweet and lows, it's almost like a little milkshake. Right. So that was the first time I had coffee is I'd look forward to it. I think it was every Tuesday or Wednesday night.
Okay.
We'd show up to Crossways and they're those little styrofoam cups. And I would put 4 sweet and lows in there.
That was a lot of sugar.
It was basically just milk and sugar, powdered milk and sugar.
Right.
And that was my conception of coffee for a long time. But these days I've turned into my dad and I drink it black and so it's funny that it's a full circle kind of thing.
Right. From going from not really being true coffee with all the stuff you put in there to now that hardened coffee of that
100%. I did cream forever, but then at one point I had done one of these, weird crash diets where I couldn't have calories for a certain portion of the day. And so I was like, you got to get used to black coffee if you like it. That's when I got into like good coffee, because when you're drinking a black, you find out real quick there's nowhere to hide.
Right.
So, you figure out there's a vast chasm between like your standard Dunkin' and then like even just, you can get good store-bought stuff, but Hawaiian beans and like it's a whole world, right? The whole coffee world, but...
Yeah. I know nothing about the coffee world, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Like, you mean, I got it wrong on trivia night about what country has the most export of coffee.
Yeah.
I thought Colombia.
Yeah, we guessed Colombia too, and it turned out to be Brazil, right?
Yeah, Brazil.
I was actually going to guess in like one of the Arabic countries, because they're Arabica beans. That's really where coffee came from, is that region of the world. And you need a cool, dry, and arid climate for them to grow. That's also why certain areas like in Hawaii are good, because they're shade grown, but much more humidity there. But yeah, so I was going to guess that, but we got that wrong too.
Yeah, so okay, I don't feel so low now.
Yeah.
It just sounded right to me, because you hear about Colombian coffee.
Yeah.
And I was just like, Colombia? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
Colombia is known for exporting a couple things, and one of them is coffee.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but obviously it's Brazil.
Yeah, 100%. Our team ended up dead last in trivia. Yeah, so I was standing to Pastor Warren. I was like, well, Jesus did say that the first will be last and the last will be first. So I would like to accept this trivia night win on behalf of Jesus.
There you go. Yeah, we were kind of, I think, in the top third, maybe a little bit down after winning. We were back-to-back champs.
I was just glad to see you guys dethroned because you were back-to-back champs. Yeah,
we were like the Kansas City Chiefs. We just couldn't handle that third title run.
You couldn't do it.
And I think our downfall was not that it would have made first place, but I think there's probably 5 or 6 times that we changed our answers from the right one to the wrong one.
We did that too on a handful of them, and it's always like, oh, I should have gone with my instinct.
And I know we're supposed to go with your first instinct, always go with your gut reaction.
Yeah, 100%.
But nope, so it was still a lot of fun.
Yeah, trivia night was lit, and I'm hoping that our night of worship will be lit in the same way. I guess that's the word the kids use, right? Is lit.
Sure.
That's probably already an old word now.
Probably. I'm older than you, so the bomb, right? That was back in my middle school days.
Yeah.
The bomb,
all that in a bag of chips,
right?
Yeah, so, the bomb. Yeah.
So it's probably not drawing any of our younger audience when we're using all these dated slang 100%. For something, saying this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly the language moves on. And I don't know about you, but like I'll pick it up from my son or from some of the younger kids around here, and then I start saying it ironically to sort of make fun of it. I started using Riz last year, like as a joke, and now I find myself actually using the word Riz, I'm like, what are you doing?
There's probably some, I think back to like college, like the girl my roommate ended up marrying, she was from like Boston, and she would always use like wicked as an adjective, like that's wicked awesome.
That's wicked awesome.
So like I think that kind of became part of kind of our group of friends kind of vocab, was saying something was wicked because of having Ace saying that.
Yeah. Funny side story. I was visiting a friend in Boston for their wedding, and I was watching like a lot of Bill Burr at the time, and he does this kind of Boston thing. And so like I'll get these sort of verbal tics where I'll just say the same thing over and over. And for some reason in that era, it was like all these Boston things. And so I had to catch myself a couple times because I was around like real Bostonians, and they're going to like think I'm mocking them when it's just like me being, silly.
Because Bill Burr's from Boston, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But so it's funny how you pick up those things.
Yeah.
You don't even realize those words are slang things that you pick up.
100%.
And it could just be that time or the people you're around.
Yeah. And just slowly make their way into your vocabulary, and before you know it, you're like talking like these 13 and 14-year-olds, Yeah,
I think the ironic one was in seminary, because one of my friends was from New York, and he's like, let's get a pie. We're like, what, cherry or apple? He's like, no, a pizza. We're like, pie? Because none of us were from the East Coast calling pizza pies.
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of became a joke, like, what type of pie we got to get today? And It's like, because none of us use that to refer to getting a pizza.
100%. And like with my son, who's in 8th grade now, like I made a deliberate decision early on, like as he was being raised, where it's like, there's always this tension between the previous generation and the next generation. And some of that is useful, but a lot of it is silly. And so I remember like adults just dismissing you for the way that you talked or like whatever. Right. And so I was like, made a conscious decision, like I'm going to embrace the silliness of like how language evolves, and like just be on board with it and be the cool adult. I'm very much not cool, especially at this age, but yeah, it's funny how that stuff makes its way into your vocabulary.
But yeah, so something we want to become part of Immanuel's vocabulary is the night of worship.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Pastor Ryan. Give me a fist bump on that.
You know, that's why I do a podcast, because I can make those smooth segues.
That's like, expert level segues.
That was a nice transition. You 100%. You didn't even know that was coming.
That was a left, right. Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, so share a little bit about the night of worship, because it's kind of your idea.
Yeah. So, you know, we have meetings every week talking about some of the elements we're trying to modernize inside of our modern worship. That's one of the efforts that, you know, we're making at Immanuel is to, well, you know, to bring our modern service into the modern era. What does that look like for us as Lutherans, and what things do we want to take from modern services and modern churches, and you know, how do we also keep our authentic tradition and roots,
right.
You know?
Yeah, so it's that blend of like seeing what other churches are doing, be like, okay, that's good. How does that fit into the context of Immanuel?
100%.
So that we don't lose our Lutheran heritage, because that is a core part of who we are, being a Lutheran church.
Yes.
And there is stuff that's amazing about our Lutheran heritage.
100%.
But there's things we can learn to adapt to make it more modern, our worship experience for people.
Yeah, 100%. And like through those brainstorming conversations, I'm always trying to, you know, think of things that could bring people together and again, in this modern sense. So it started with some things like jazz in the courtyard over the summer, which I'm hoping to bring back in the warmer months again.
There we go. That was people love that.
Yeah, you know, just things, and like the trivia night's another great example of that. In some ways, like it is almost like its own night of worship. We're together. There's fellowship. There's great conversations. There's food. There's real merriment and fellowship together. Right. You know, and so I've been focused on like, what are the things that we can do? What can I do coming from a musical background that would be something like that? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I've heard of these night of worships. You know, I've been to some events like this, but it was really thinking about my one. I have a couple of ones, I guess you could say. And so, yeah, a lot of the guys I know come from the music world, and there's kind of like there's two halves to the music world. There's the sort of like classically trained, like buttoned up, very proper professional kind of music world. Mm-hmm. And, you know, then there's kind of like the independent scene, which is everything from like cover bands and tribute bands to like the bar scene, you know, and that's the world I come from more so. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting characters in that nightlife world. Right. And those are the dudes that I think about a lot. Like a lot of them have big hearts. A lot of them are more spiritual than they know themselves. But many of them are resistant to even just the mention of anything religious, you know? And so I've invited a couple of these guys like many times, and a lot of them are musicians too. So I've been trying to sneak them in the back door of like, hey, do you want to come play for the worship band? You know,
right?
You want to gig this Sunday? But yeah, so part of the inkling of the night of worship was like, what's an event that might be appealing to people like that? And so, you know, a night of worship, really, as far as I understand it, it's a night of praise, but it's focused on the medium of music, right? So, you know, we will have a message from pastors during the night of worship, and we're going to have some scripture readings and some of the traditional elements you would come to expect in a service, but it'll mostly be, the focus will mostly be the music.
Music, right?
Yeah, and so that's why I had mentioned when we talked about it in church, it's similar to the BBBQ because at the B, let's call it the B3Q. Right. You know, we do a bigger music set there, being outside and having the sunshine. And so it's a little bit like that, but even more music.
Right, where there's really not much liturgy because we don't have much liturgy in the BBBQ, where it's just like, hey, praise band does a couple songs, pastor and I get up, do a little bit of a message.
Yeah.
And then, you know, praise team some more. We kind of continue the message.
Yeah.
But there's no like responsive readings.
Right. And part of that adaptation, as far as I understand it, is like we're doing a public ministry there, which is different than being inside of the four walls
right. It's
on
still
a Sunday.
Worship. It's just a different way of worship. And I mean, as you talk about like the back door, that was kind of one of the things when we started talking about even our ones of like, you know, those people in our lives that don't believe in Jesus or maybe walked away, like, what's ways that it kind of invite them to non-threatening things into the church? And like right now I've been kind of leading the elders through a book called The Future Church, and it kind of talks about the upper and lower room. Like the lower room is kind of what brings people into the doors, like our trunk or treat and like shining stars, where maybe there's not much discipling in there, but it gets kind of people equated. And then the upper room is like where the discipling happens, where people grow in their faith. Yeah. And I see like this kind of being like, you know, kind of a lower room situation where they're coming into the building. Totally. Yeah, they're getting some of the word, but it's not maybe going to be a super deep dive and like Bible study, like engaging, like,
Right.
what is this? But it's, and like the whole point of the book is like, what are you going to spend your time focusing on? Like the lower room or the upper room? Like both are needed, but where should more time be? Like, you need to get people to come in.
Yeah.
But you also have to be like discipling and helping them grow in their faith.
Right. Yeah. And it may change by season, right? Like I know that's something that some of these larger modern churches can struggle with is that you may be able to pack a lot of people in the doors, but then if they're falling off because there's that lack of discipleship, then the boat's unbalanced. And so that's why I use that reference to the BBBQ because that's a more public facing ministry day. I think of the night of worship that way. It's certainly for our congregants. But yeah, I want it to be as publicly facing as possible, in that I want people to feel proud to invite their friends and family.
Right, and that's kind of even like community meal. I would say is like a lower room kind of activity where we have a prayer, but it's just a time of fellowship, and that's why we partnered like the community meal with the night of worship, saying, hey, we have a lot of people in the building for the community meal. What can we do to make, hey, here's a little extended, check this out.
Yeah, I think that was real smart, you and Pastor, to think of that as big brain stuff there, connecting those
Sometimes it happens on my side.
Yeah, hey, sometimes it's,
sometimes everything's
my two brain
firing.
cells are talking to each other.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. And, part of my story at Immanuel is coming through the back door that way, too. I was just volunteering in the band again, and, things evolved from there. And so, now I'm here at the church full time, which is still blowing my mind, frankly. But yeah, I think the kind of backdoor, the lower room idea, that's important, and yeah, again, anything that can just bring us together in a way that is joyful. And so again, that's why I love stuff like the trivia night and whatever. It's like, we're closest to God in those moments, I feel like, when we're genuinely sharing with one another. You know?
I mean, I think of like times whether I've been at like the youth gathering or passion conference, or even this past summer youth at Camp Harvest, like that time of worship of like, it's amazing when you gather together with people singing the praises of God. Like, I think in the first time I went to Passion, which might have been 2012, 2013, one of those 2 years, where it was like 60,000 college-age kids in the Georgia Dome praising God.
I was going to say, now, how loud was that?
Pretty loud. And
pretty loud, right?
Awesome. And like, and even at that point, I probably wasn't as familiar with like what was hip, for, using all those fancy cool words kids use hip for like praise and worship music. Because, my church house, we had a praise and worship service once a month, but it wasn't maybe like what ours is here.
Sure.
But I'm like, I didn't recognize some of these songs because it was David Crowder, it was Christian Stanfield, Chris Tomlin, Matt Redman.
Yeah.
So a lot of those heavy hitters in the contemporary praise and worship world, I mean, other years Hillsong was there.
Yeah.
But like, I still remember like, them doing some of those songs, like, okay, it sounds vaguely familiar. But then hearing Chris Tomlin's version of Crown Him with Many Crowns, which I'm like, okay, growing up Lutheran, that is a song I know.
It's a banger.
And so on those, like, I've never heard this many people sing this song.
Yeah.
And it was one of those, and that was the other thing too. I remember at that conference thinking like, I'm Lutheran. What do I do with my hands? Because everybody had their hands up worship.
Like that Will Ferrell thing. Yeah. Well, I don't know what to do with my hands.
But yeah, they're all, and that's great. People worship in different ways, and they're doing that. I'm like, I'm Lutheran. I keep my hands here.
I keep my hands here.
But then it would be funny to go to like maybe some other church, like a Lutheran church in the area for different reasons when I was down there. And like, I was like, man, this is a little bit different style of worship because it was that tradition. I was like, I feel comfortable here, but I almost at times.
Sure.
And that's what's going to be great about the night of worship. People can worship whatever way
however
they want.
Yes, absolutely.
Hands up, hands at their side. However they want to worship. And that's, to me, what is the great part of worship. There's no really right or wrong way. As long as you're being reverent to God and just praising Him. If you want your hands up, awesome. If you don't,
right.
Awesome.
However you're feeling it and experiencing it. And that was one of the reasons I asked it if it was loud, because I do feel like volume has something to do with being able to sort of lose yourself in the moment.
Right.
Like I've heard a lot of comedians talk about how the conditions of the room that they're in are like paramount to getting the laughs to travel across the room like a wave. You kind of want to pack them in tight like sardines so you're hearing and feeling the laughter around you. The room needs to be sufficiently dark. The light needs to be sufficiently bright. And if you get those few elements right, it actually has a measurable effect on the outcome of how people receive that stand-up set. And I feel the same thing with music in general, but especially worship music, is these things that can seem like sort of silly, like, lighting, how loud we are, how close we are. They seem superficial. But it's part of the magic that happens where, you can open yourself up to receive, and that's a vulnerable thing,
Right.
But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's the same reason I think why sharing a meal can be so impactful. It's partly vulnerable to eat in front of someone. It's a little bit
and you're not
vulnerable,
and it's going to feel awkward just sitting in silence as you're eating.
So you fill it with conversation, and so maybe that conversation starts off a little bit awkward or strained, but before you know it, you
start kind of. I think of like going to my barber. Like those initial times going, it's like, oh, how's the weather going? That small talk, which to me I kind of hate. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But now since I've been going to the same guy for like 7 years, those conversations are easy.
And there's a rhythm there,
There's
right?
a rhythm. It's like, hey,
yeah.
let's talk sports, or hey, watching any good movies or TV lately.
Yeah.
So, you get to know the person so you can have more than just those superficial, like, hey, how's the weather?
Totally. And, that's part of what we're hoping to achieve with this night of worship. So that's a long roundabout way of saying it's going to be loud.
Right. And even with that,
it's going to be loud and dark, you guys.
Right. And that's even like we talked about when we started kind of the re-campaign, which, part of that is the new lighting and AV in the sanctuary, which, will be coming hopefully pretty soon. We got things in progress for that. But with that, like we talked about that, like the louder it is, the more likely people are going to sing because they're not concerned, oh, the person next to me is going to hear me singing. So I'm just going to be quiet and not sing very loud.
Yeah.
But if the person next, they can't hear me because it's loud in here, I'm more willing to sing, and then that will make everything just louder.
Yeah.
Then in the dark, if it's a little bit darker, you're not worried like, oh, Joe's sitting next to me. Is he going to judge me if I want to have my hands up or,
Right.
I kind of have, I think what somebody called like the tables where I kind of have my hands down lower when I'm doing kind of like open out like that.
Yeah.
But so if it's darker, you're not as concerned like somebody's going to be seeing you in that vulnerable position, how you might want to worship.
100%. Yeah.
You're more freely willing to worship because like you're not caring about what others are thinking or seeing.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? Is like we want you to feel totally enraptured and lost in the praise. And like that. And, it's easy for us to kind of get in that headspace when maybe we're alone in the car driving or have our headphones on, we have a private moment. And so having a sort of private experience publicly can be frankly awkward. And so that's part of the reason of doing things like raising the volume. Plus, I want to play drums at full volume. Selfishly, I would like to do that.
Right, because I think I remember you talking about that for BBBQ, that, you can hit the drums as hard as you want.
Well, and what's funny is I've now, so, drums, the dynamic range on drums is huge. We can go from super quiet to like, as like crashing super loud.
Right.
And so there's certain ways that you approach like certain parts, like, and so even for the BBBQ, even though I could play full volume, I was so used to playing at low dynamics that there was parts where like I was not laying into my cymbals the way that I would if I had been practicing and playing these songs at full volume all along,
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about like, I'm thinking like Nirvana Unplugged. Like, thinking about how they normally will play, Dave Grohl would probably just go all out hitting the drums.
Yeah.
But then like I just picture like the videos I've seen of Nirvana's Unplugged where Dave Grohl's just kind of gently hitting. He's got the brushes on his drumstick.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what a different change from him of so going crazy to just that kind of calmer.
Yeah.
And it's a quieter sound.
Yeah, 100%. And if there's any young musicians out there watching, whether you play drums or not, like learning that dynamic range is actually huge. I came from like the metal and punk rock world, so there are no dynamics in drums. It's all just as loud and as hard and as fast as you can play. It's very gladiator-like playing, which I think is probably part of what attracted me as a young man, was like, like it was, so aggressive, and I really liked that. But then when I got into situations where, whether it's a venue where you have to play low volume, like a coffee house, or it's a genre like jazz, I started studying jazz probably 4 or 5 years ago, and like, one of the biggest takeaways is like stick control, bro. You got to be able to control your sticks. And
is that why they have the different kind of holding? A jazz drummer holds them different.
The traditional grip is that really comes from the military. So fun little history lesson here. I'll try not to tangent too much here, but like during marching during war times, you're covering lots of terrain, and so they found that having a drum slung in front of you, like your knees were always kicking it. And so they started slinging the drums off to the side. But, I don't have any sticks here, but you can imagine if I've got a drum to my side, it's very awkward to get this left hand to play. So they just took the stick and turned it upside down, and that's why you see that goofy grip a lot of jazz drummers use. Anyways, once the bebop scene started to develop in the 40s, those early drummers were all ex-military dudes that played snare drum. So they just took that grip and brought it over to the jazz kit. And so purists and jazz still love traditional grip. It doesn't give you any advantage. If there's any drummers online watching this, it might start a war in the comments section. Right. It does not make a difference. It is just a tool. Let me emphasize that it is just a tool. But yeah, so the grip doesn't have to do with their dynamics, but certainly the way that they're implementing whatever grip they choose is what's going to influence the dynamics. Okay. You know?
Yeah, it's all above my head. And, my musical talents and skills, they're non-existent. I love music, but can't play it or anything.
That's always a funny thing to me, that like how we're all built differently that way, where like you can have a deep appreciation for something, but have no draw towards doing the thing, right. Like,
yeah. I wish I could play like guitar, but I was like, I don't think I could. Like, reading music isn't my thing. And,
with my experience as a teacher is like, with enough time put in, right. you'll get somewhere. I'll get you there.
It's like, anything. Like, I remember somebody telling me once with golf, like, you need to golf 20 hours a week to get better. Like, I love golfing. I don't have 20 hours a week to spend golf.
That's the thing is, they call it the okay valley or the okay threshold, but like most things that you're going to do as a hobby, you do a lot of learning in the beginning and then you plateau, and that's the okay valley. And so to get out of the okay valley, you need like consistent, very specific training. Right. And so this happens to a ton of musicians. That's why there's so many guitar players that know 5 or 6 chords, and that's the extent of their knowledge, because it just takes a lot of concerted effort and diligent time and training. So there's something like, have you heard of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah.
So for anyone not familiar, it's something like you need to spend 10,000 hours in any given discipline to obtain mastery. And the caveat there is not just 10,000 hours, but 10,000 unique hours. So if you spend 10,000 hours just playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you'll be really great at Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right. but you won't have the full breadth of knowledge that you need to master your instrument, right?
And to me, that's the same with like growing in our faith. Like, people think, I'm just going to go like once a week to church, maybe read my Bible throughout the week. It's like, okay, you're not going to get any better necessarily. Like, yeah, you believe, but it's kind of, as you said, that plateau of okay, to get better at faith, to get stronger and grow in your faith and your knowledge.
Yeah.
You got to be with it every day. Like, that's why I tell our kids in confirmation, like, think about basketball. What if you play basketball and then you take 7 months off? Don't pick up a basketball.
Right.
How are you growing?
100%.
No, you're staying where you're at, or probably going to decrease in ability because you haven't played.
Right.
You get rusty.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's why our faith needs to be an everyday active thing.
That's a really good point, Pastor. It's almost like you should be a pastor for a reason.
Yeah.
You're a pastor for a reason.
Yeah.
It reminds me of your sermon this past Sunday, which I really loved. I loved that reference and that tie-in of like, where are you spending your time, basically?
Right.
I remember one time I was really into Call of Duty with my buddies. This was like early 2000s. Who wasn't?
Modern Warfare was a great game.
100%. Oh, yeah. You know what's up.
Oh, yeah.
But, there's that counter that tells you how long you've been playing the game. And I remember at some point saying, it's like, you have spent 10 days in the game. And I was just like, that is...
And the game came out 10 days ago.
But like the way that time accumulates is pretty stunning. And
you don't realize it because you're just enjoying, like, I was always amazed playing Call of Duty. I'd usually get it like the day it came out, like, but then I'm playing that evening and people are already like, whatever was it, 50 was like the max, and then you started to like, I can't think what they
the guys who got the beta and were there like on the early pre-release, and like it's so insanely competitive.
How much time do you got to get to the like highest like ranking up to level 50? And I was like, I just don't have that time. I don't even think after playing for hours I had that.
Right.
I was like a 20 maybe.
Yeah, and so that, a lot of what I took away from your sermon was like, how are you spending those interstitial moments? Because it's easy. Like, I think something like 60% of Americans' free time is spent watching television. And so just imagine if that 4 or 5 hours that you have to yourself, if you like you're saying, if you spent it in the Word or any number of ways that you might expand yourself, your relationship to God,
Right. Not saying those other things are bad.
No,
but it's that like priority, like, like I would always tell, like, it's just easier to maybe fall into that trap of like, I don't have to do much. Like, that's my thing. Like, I enjoy reading, but at times I'm like, it's just easier to sit here and watch TV and not have to read.
Yeah, there's a book called The Joy of Not Working, and one of the things he articulates in the book, I forget the author's name, Ernie Zelinsky, I think. But one of the things he articulates in the book is that like we have active activities, we have passive activities, and then we have active passive activities. And so like reading is an example of like an active passive activity, right? It's passive in the sense that like you're not going out and running a marathon. Right. But it's active in the sense that like you need to engage your mind in spirit, especially if you're reading the Bible, to read, you know.
Right. And that's a hard thing with reading the Bible. Sometimes, like, I mean, it's like anything you read, at least in my case, I can read something and then like 5 seconds later, I'm like, what did I just read?
What did I just read? Yeah.
And so to me, like, especially when it comes to like reading the Bible, it's a better focus on like quality instead of quantity. Not like, well, I read 5 chapters of the Bible today.
Yeah, yeah.
What are those 5 chapters do you remember? But if you remember 5 verses and you're like, hey, this is how this is going to impact my life, or this is what I kind of grew in, that's better than saying I read 5 chapters, even if you just read 5 verses.
100%. I'm always trying to drive this home to my students in regards to practice, because you'll get a student that like they won't practice all week and then they'll panic practice for 2 hours before their lesson because they don't want to be in trouble with Mr. Joe. Not that I'm super mean, but like I know when you didn't practice, and I'm not going to pretend like I don't know that. I'm going to be like, buddy, we really got to practice.
Let's talk here.
And so just that pressure is enough for kids to be like, panic practice before they come in. But the thing is like, I would rather you have like 10, 15 very focused minutes throughout the week, because that 2 hours, like, you know, you repeated the same thing for an hour and a half of that. There's only 30 minutes of new information that really happened. And then you had no reinforcement throughout the week, you know? So like, I always tell students like, just lower the bar. Like, that sounds like funny advice, but like lower your aim. I'm not saying not to aim, still aim at a goal, but if you make it sufficiently small that it increases the likelihood of you being successful at it, and thus increases the likelihood that you'll repeat it, those small gains across time, you know, it's the same thing with working out and lifting. I used to do the same thing where like I'd burn myself out working out really hard, like 2 days a week, but then I'm so sore I can't work out for 5 or 6 days. But if you do 15 or 20 minutes a day, but I'm doing it every day, or I'm aiming for every day, and so I get 4 or 5, it's so much more manageable.
Well, I think of like training a dog. Like I think about when I took Madison to a place here in Palatine for dog training. You know, they worked on her all those things, and it was like a boarding, and because I went to the youth gathering, so I was out of town, so it was like a combined training and boarding. And I was like, okay, now that you're back, here's what we worked on. This is what you need to work on every day with her. And it was, you know, not this my fault, not probably what it is. But then I'd be like, okay, well, I'd come home and I'm like, okay, let's work on some of these things that we're supposed to work on, that you were trained on, so that you'd be a properly trained dog.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'd be at work and she'd be in the cage all day. And then when I came home to try to train her, she had no motivation to want to train, because she was like, I was cooped up in a cage all day. I just want to play and run around.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's why, you know, Madison isn't probably trained as well
trained as she should be. Sure.
But it's just that, and even with that practicing, as you're talking about, it's like, what are you practicing? Like, you know, I think of like sports. Like, you know, if I'm practicing golf, since I'm really bad at golf, I enjoy it, but I'm like, I know my swing's horrible. So anytime I'm practicing, if I don't have like somebody to instruct me, I'm practicing all the bad habits and traits that I have in my golf swing, instead of somebody saying, hey, correct this, work on this, think about this. So then I'm correcting my mistakes. So then that just becomes second nature.
That's that quality over quantity thing, right? More correct quality reps will get you to the goal faster. And so, and so like speaking of practice, there's been a lot of practice for the musicians coming into this night of worship.
You're learning.
I'm trying to match you, you know, I'm picking up on your moves, man. But yeah, so the musicians have been practicing a lot for this, not only because it's a bigger set, but we're using a new track system we're excited to try out. This will dovetail really nicely once we have all of our new audio and visual gear getting installed. I know the congregation's been hearing us talk about that for a long time, but it's a huge technical process. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of expertise from across many different domains.
Right.
We're working with a company that's advising us on this. We're working with our own build team here that's implementing this stuff. So it is coming. I know you've been hearing us say that, but that technology is going to, some of that we're introducing at the night of worship, which is exciting for us, but also a little nerve-wracking. And I should know better, because my wife and I have a dance and music studio, and every year when we do our big June recital, people are super appreciative of it, but I think especially newer parents think like, oh, you know, it's just like getting some costumes and throwing on some music and the kids dance. And like the recital is so much more moving parts than that. And I have foolishly drank my own Kool-Aid, and that I was like, yeah, it's night of worship, you know, we're playing some more tunes.
It's just an extended.
No big deal. And like every day I'm putting out some new little fire, trying to figure out how to do this thing for the first time. So, you know, that's another way of saying like, thank you to all the people that are involved in this process, from the tech team to the volunteers to the musicians, the band. everyone's been so helpful. The pastors, it really does take a village to do stuff like this. And we're super excited to be doing this,
Yeah, it should be a great evening. And, even if you can't make it to the communion meal, still come out to the night of worship, 6:30 in the sanctuary.
Yes, 6:30 in the sanctuary. The theme is radical love. This actually, originally, we were trying to do it before Lent because we wanted to tie it into our Lent theme, which is reconciliation, right?
Right, yep.
And so when I was talking to pastors about this, I was thinking like, well, there's this new song I was playing with, bringing into the band called Radical Love. And I thought, radical love, that seems to be like a precondition for something like reconciliation, right? You have to have the love of Christ. And so that's why we chose that theme, even though it's going to be happening during Lent season. I think it still ties together nicely.
We're still doing the same theme.
Yeah, 100%. So we actually have a theme verse. If you don't mind, I'll read it just to share with everyone. Oh, that's okay. It's just my phone. So our theme verse is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, which say, "But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved." And so I am very regularly moved by sort of the radical love of God.
That he still can love us while we were yet sinners.
Yeah, like that's certainly something since being back in church that's been like a spotlight has been put on my own spiritual walk is like and I mentioned this to you guys before, but I can be very cat-like. I like to be out when I like to be out, and I like to be away when I like to be away. And part of what that's amounted to for me is like having a real impatience for difficult people and just being like, I'm just not going to, if someone sufficiently irritates me, I have no problem just never interacting with them ever again.
Right.
And so like, that's a useful mechanism in terms of like, it's kept my friend group close and tight and pure in some sense. But the downside of that is like, that's not what Christ commissions us to do, right? Like Christ came here for the sinners. He didn't come for the righteous, right? And he says that explicitly. Like I came for the sinners.
The one verse I like is, throughout the Gospels about, the sick don't need the hospital. The sick are the ones who need the hospital, not the healthy.
Right.
The church is for sinners.
Yes,
and we're all sinners, so we all need the church.
Yes, and I've 100% felt convicted of that over this last year being back in church is like, oh, Joe, you need to be like more patient and loving towards the difficult people because you're fine when people are fine and they're not bugging you. But as soon as someone bugs you, you're like, see ya.
Right. The extra grace required. The EGA people, extra grace required.
Yeah.
EGR.
Yeah. Extra grace required. That reminds me, there was a restaurant, I think in Schaumburg, it might have been the Village, but there was a sign that said, every customer makes us happy. Some when they come, some when they leave. But it reminds me of the extra grace required. Like you can have maybe happy is not the right word, but you can get fulfillment out of behaving Christ-like in those difficult moments and relationships.
Because like I think there's some people that I know I gotta show a little extra grace, but I'm like, you know what? There's people probably have had to feel the same way about me.
Sure. Yeah. There's something you do that annoys somebody for sure. Right. That's just part of being human. And like, I can be very temperamental where like, I'm fine. I'm cool until I'm not cool. And then I fly off the handle about something. And like a lot of people have had to show me grace over that and realize like, that's not his true heart and character. That's a moment in time. And then I'll, I always try to come back and talk and apologize and that kind of thing. But like, yeah, that's a characteristic I battle with is like, I could be volatile when I'm tired and like, people have given me grace over that. And so who am I to not extend the same grace to other people for their thing, whatever their thing is,
Yeah, we all have our things and we all need that forgiveness.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's where God's radical love, that he loves us despite. He knows all that. He knew all those times where we're going to sin or do something contrary to what he wants us to do, yet he still loves us in that.
Yeah, 100%. And so I would just like to shine a spotlight on that, emphasize that, and celebrate that on our night of worship and really bring that to the forefront. And so I think it's going to be awesome. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous, but I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and we hope to see a lot of people there, and it will be a great evening to just praise our Lord and have a night of worship.
100%. So bring your friends, bring your family, and we'll see you guys there.
Dubs Unscripted.